Victoria. The name came through the phone like a broken whisper, trembling and barely stitched together by breath. Victoria. I'm so sorry. I tried to slow them down. I asked for the warrant, but they didn't even let me finish. They brought a locksmith. They're drilling into your box, I didn't move. Behind me, the skyline shimmered through the floor-to-ceiling glass of my corner office. 41 years old, director of corporate compliance for one of the largest logistics firms on the eastern seaboard. I knew panic when I heard it. And David Miller, the senior branch manager at First Metropolitan Depository, was unraveling. Take a breath, David, I said evenly. Tell me exactly what's happening. The FBI is in the vault, Financial Crimes Division. They locked down the entire lower level. They drilled straight through the faceplate of Box 714, Box 714, my sanctuary. That steel drawer wasn't just metal and concrete. It held the last pieces of my family that still felt clean. My grandmother's sapphire ring, smuggled out of Europe decades ago. Original birth certificates. The deed to my grandfather's lakeside cabin. Photographs tinted in sepia, of ancestors who believed integrity wasn't negotiable, and now federal agents were tearing through it. They found cash. David whispered, stacks of it. Hundreds of thousands. They're bagging it as evidence. Victoria, they think you're laundering money. Of course they did. Thank you for calling. I replied calmly. Do not say anything further without legal counsel present. I ended the call gently. No theatrics. No trembling hands. I placed the phone face down and stood, smoothing the wrinkles from my charcoal suit. The betrayal wasn't shocking. It was inevitable. My father, Richard Sterling, city commissioner for urban zoning, had built a career on influence. My mother, Evelyn, curated philanthropy by day and managed my father's alternative revenue by night. For years, developers seeking zoning approvals paid expedited consideration fees in untraceable cash. But bribe money is difficult to hide in the digital age. Politicians are audited, accounts scrutinized, assets traced. So they needed something cleaner. They needed me. 3 years ago, when pneumonia put me in the hospital, I handed my parents my apartment keys to check on my cat. Attached to that ring was the small brass key to Box 714. Trust is a powerful blindness. While I lay in a hospital bed, my father duplicated that key. For 36 months, they accessed my safe deposit box, forged my signature, and quietly stacked illicit cash beside my grandmother's pearls. They weren't hiding money. They were building a shield. If investigators traced the funds, the warrant would carry my name, not theirs. The desk phone chimed. Miss Sterling, my assistant Sarah said carefully, 4 agents from the FBI are here. They're requesting you immediately. Send them in. I replied. Moments later, the doors opened. 4 men in tailored suits stepped inside, controlled, precise, predatory. The lead agent introduced himself without warmth. Victoria Sterling, Supervisory Special Agent Daniel Hayes. We need you to stand and keep your hands visible. They expected fear. Instead, I gestured toward the chairs. Good morning, Agent Hayes. Coffee. He slid glossy photographs across my desk. Images of my drilled open safe deposit box. Stacks of rubber banded 100 bills resting beside family heirlooms. $850,000, he said. Care to explain? I studied the photos. If I were laundering money, I wouldn't hide raw cash under my own legal identity. I design encrypted financial systems for a living. I dismantle fraud for corporations worth billions. Did they really think I'd commit a crime this sloppy? Are you arresting me? I asked calmly. Hayes leaned forward. You're looking at 20 years. He believed he had me cornered. But they had made one fatal assumption. They thought I discovered the betrayal today. I didn't. 8 months ago, when I visited the vault, I noticed something microscopic. The dust pattern on my grandmother's jewelry box hinge had shifted. I don't ignore anomalies. I document them. And I install solutions. So before you decide whether I walked blindly into disaster, Ask yourself this. What would you do if the people who raised you turned your name into their shield? Because this wasn't the beginning of my downfall. It was the beginning of theirs. Agent Hayes didn't blink. But something shifted in his posture. You're telling me, he said slowly, that you haven't accessed that vault in 8 months. Yet you somehow know exactly how that money got there. I didn't say that, I replied calmly. I said I know who accessed it. The 3 agents behind him adjusted their stance, recalibrating. 10 minutes ago, they had walked into my office expecting an easy arrest. Now they were sensing resistance, not emotional resistance, but structural, the dangerous kind. Explain, Hayes demanded. 8 months ago, I went to retrieve my passport for a compliance audit overseas. When I opened box 714, something microscopic caught my attention. The velvet dust lining the hinge of my grandmother's jewelry case had been disturbed. Barely visible, but enough. Most people wouldn't notice. But I build risk detection systems for a living. My entire career depends on identifying discrepancies smaller than a decimal point. So I did what I always do. I installed surveillance. Not security cameras from a hardware store. Not anything traceable. I commissioned a private specialist in Zurich to engineer something discreet, something elegant, a vintage black resin fountain pen. It looked like a writing instrument, felt like one, balanced like one. It wasn't. Inside the barrel was a motion-activated micro camera with ultra-low light recording capability, encrypted storage, independent power cell. It activated only when the vault lights turned on. For 8 months, it documented every entry into that steel drawer. Hayes stared at me. You're claiming there's video evidence inside that box. I'm not claiming, I corrected gently. I'm informing you. Silence flooded the office. The young tech agent opened his encrypted field laptop immediately. Hayes grabbed his phone and barked instructions to the vault recovery team. Isolate the pen. Carefully, extract any internal storage. Now, minutes stretched like wire. Then the confirmation came. There's a micro SD card inside the barrel, the tech agent announced. Encrypted. Hayes looked at me. Not aggressively. Carefully. I recited the decryption key from memory. The laptop processed. A digital click echoed softly through the room. 14 video files, the tech agent said. Timestamped. Play the most recent. Hayes ordered. The screen flickered. Then the vault appeared in perfect clarity. Harsh fluorescent light. Steel drawer extended. Camera angled upward from the lower corner. And then, my parents stepped into frame. Richard Sterling, City Commissioner, Navy suit, confident posture. Evelyn Sterling, cashmere coat, designer handbag. They were alone. They were relaxed. They were laughing. My mother reached into her bag and removed thick stacks of $100 bills wrapped in industrial rubber bands. God, I hate this dusty basement, she muttered. It's temporary. My father replied casually, shoving my grandmother's jewelry box aside to make space. Marcus Development paid in full, $300,000. His voice was clear, crisp, undeniable. And if the ethics committee ever audits my accounts, he continued with a chuckle, they won't find a cent. Victoria's spotless record is the perfect shield. The room went silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the laptop. Evelyn picked up my grandmother's sapphire ring and slid it onto her finger, examining it under the vault lights. Do you think she even checks this box anymore? She laughed. She works too much to notice. The drawer slammed shut. Black screen. No one spoke. Hayes straightened slowly. The sharp federal confidence he'd entered with had dissolved into something else entirely. Understanding. They framed you, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. Not with anger, with confirmation. Hayes looked back at the frozen screen. He had spent 2 years building a corruption case against city zoning officials. He had chased financial shadows across shell companies and campaign donations. And the confession had been sitting in a safe deposit box the entire time. You could have brought this to us months ago, he said carefully. Why wait? Because evidence without strategy is useless. Because my father has influence. Because politicians don't fall from accusations, they fall from documented seizures. I needed you to execute the raid, I answered. I needed the money physically seized under federal warrant before they knew the walls were closing in. Hayes' eyes narrowed, not suspiciously, but impressed. You let us think you were the target. I needed you to believe it, I said. Silence again. The dynamic in the room had completely reversed. 10 minutes ago, they had been preparing handcuffs for me. Now they were staring at the architect of their case. And that's when I reached for my phone. Agent Hayes, I said calmly, would you like to arrest them at their estate, or would you prefer they walk voluntarily into the trap? He studied me carefully. What are you suggesting? My father believes I'm about to be taken into custody, I said. He'll come to manage the fallout. He'll want to control the narrative. I unlocked my phone. And when he walks through that door, you won't need a search warrant. Hayes didn't stop me. He stepped back. The agents waited. I dialed my father's private number and turned on speaker. It rang twice. Victoria. My father answered. I forced my breath to tremble. Dad, please, you have to come. The FBI is here. They drilled the vault. They found cash. They think it's mine. There was a pause. A microscopic exhale of relief. Do not say anything, he commanded. Your mother and I are on our way. The call ended. The tears vanished from my face instantly. I looked at Agent Hayes. They'll be here in 20 minutes. Hayes crossed his arms slowly. For the first time since entering my office, he wasn't interrogating me. He was waiting with me. 22 minutes later, the oak doors of my office opened again. This time, they didn't swing in with federal authority. They burst open with political arrogance. My father entered first. Richard Sterling, city commissioner, master of zoning leverage and backroom influence. His navy suit was perfectly pressed, silver tie centered like armor. My mother followed, draped in cream cashmere, her expression carefully sculpted into maternal outrage. They came prepared for theater. They expected chaos. They expected tears. They expected to save their daughter from a misunderstanding. What they found instead was silence. I sat behind my desk, composed. Agent Hayes leaned casually against the side, arms folded. The encrypted laptop was open, screen facing the door. Paused frozen, on my father's face, mid-laugh, holding a brick of cash inside my safe deposit box. My father stopped walking. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. His stride shortened. His breath hitched. The performance script in his mind misfired. Victoria, what is this? He demanded, attempting authority. Agent Hayes didn't respond. He didn't need to. I stood slowly and walked around my desk, heels echoing against hardwood, each step deliberate. Controlled. They're not arresting me, Dad, I said evenly. They just had a few questions about a pen. His eyes flicked toward the laptop again. Confusion, calculation, fear, the Mont Blanc. I clarified softly. Recognition sparked, and then faded into horror. Before he could form a sentence, I reached past Agent Hayes and pressed the space bar. The vault appeared again, clear, unforgiving. My father's voice filled the room. 300,000 untraceable. And if the ethics committee audits my accounts, they won't find a dime. Victoria's clean record is the perfect shield. My mother's laughter followed, sharp, careless. On screen, she lifted my grandmother's sapphire ring and tried it on. Do you think she even checks this box? She mocked. In real life, Evelyn staggered backward as if struck. No, she whispered. The video continued only long enough to show my father shoving stacks of money beside heirlooms before slamming the drawer shut. I paused it again. Silence crushed the room. My father's complexion had drained from polished statesman to exposed defendant in seconds. Victoria. He tried, voice shaking. This is out of context. It was a campaign contribution. Temporary storage. You don't understand? I understand perfectly. I interrupted. I stepped closer. You forged my signature. You duplicated my key. You used my name as insulation. His composure cracked. You're my daughter? He hissed desperately. You protect family? The word echoed. Family. I looked at him the way I analyze corrupted data, without emotion, without nostalgia. You stopped being my family the moment you decided prison was an acceptable outcome for me. Agent Hayes straightened. The atmosphere shifted again, this time not strategic, not psychological. Final. Richard Sterling. Evelyn Sterling? Hayes announced, voice iron cold. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit extortion, money laundering, and violations under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. My mother gasped as agents secured her wrists. My father didn't resist. He couldn't. The evidence wasn't circumstantial. It was his voice, his face, his hands. High-definition confession inside a federally secured vault. As Hayes read their rights, I stepped back behind my desk and folded my hands. I didn't feel triumph. I felt clarity. They were escorted out the same doors they'd stormed through minutes earlier, only this time in handcuffs. Sarah stood frozen in the hallway as the untouchable city commissioner was led toward the elevators. He didn't look back at me. He couldn't. When the doors finally closed and the room settled into silence, Hayes turned to me. You orchestrated this, he said quietly. Not accusing, observing. I corrected an anomaly, I replied. He studied me for a long moment. You could have warned them? Yes, I said. And? I met his eyes. If I had warned them, they would have destroyed evidence, mobilized attorneys, claimed political sabotage. Instead, you seized the cash first. Hayes gave a slow nod. You let us believe you were the suspect. I needed an airtight chain of custody. I answered. The respect in the room was no longer subtle. The agents who had once prepared cuffs for me now understood. They had just witnessed a precision takedown. But this wasn't over. Because arrests are loud. Trials are louder. And public corruption doesn't collapse quietly. As I returned to my seat and looked out over the skyline, I knew one thing. The real fallout hadn't begun yet. The news broke before sunset. By 6:00 p.m., every major outlet in the city was running the same headline. City Commissioner arrested in federal corruption probe. The footage looped relentlessly. My father being escorted in handcuffs. My mother shielding her face from cameras that had once adored her at charity galas. The same press that praised their philanthropy now dissected their downfall frame by frame. I watched none of it. Instead, I sat in my office long after everyone had left, the skyline dimming into night. My phone vibrated constantly. Board members, attorneys, journalists, distant relatives who suddenly remembered I existed. I answered only one call. Agent Hayes? They're processing them downtown, he said. Asset forfeiture motions are already in motion. We moved fast. How fast? I asked. Faster than they expected. That was the point. Within 48 hours, federal authorities froze every account tied to my father's financial network. Offshore holdings, shell corporations, investment vehicles layered through consulting firms. My mother's meticulously managed Cayman structures collapsed like paper in rain. They had built a maze, but the video from that pen had provided the missing thread. And once investigators started pulling, the entire tapestry unraveled. Developers began cooperating. One subpoena led to 5 indictments. 5 indictments led to 11. The zoning department was audited internally. City council members publicly distanced themselves from my father's legacy. The man who once controlled skyline approvals couldn't even control his own defense narrative. He tried. Of course, through attorneys, he claimed entrapment, political conspiracy, fabricated evidence. But high-definition footage recorded inside a federally secured vault doesn't bend under rhetoric. especially when paired with seized cash bearing matching serial documentation under warrant. 14 months later, sentencing day arrived. I did not attend. I read the outcome in a 2-page federal summary instead. 22 years. My mother, facing overwhelming financial trails she couldn't untangle, accepted a plea agreement and cooperated. 15 years. Their estate was auctioned. Luxury vehicles liquidated. Art collections cataloged and sold. Even the country club revoked honorary plaques bearing my father's name. 30 years of political capital erased in less than a season. People often imagine revenge as emotional, loud, explosive. It isn't. True justice is procedural. It's paperwork, warrants, evidence logs, court transcripts. It's patience. 3 weeks after the arrests, my board of directors requested a private meeting. I expected caution. Instead, I received promotion. Your strategic foresight prevented reputational contamination, the chairman said carefully, and demonstrated exceptional risk containment under pressure. Chief Risk Officer, new title, same office. The skyline looked no different. But I did. First Metropolitan issued a formal apology for the vault breach. They upgraded security protocols, replaced the damaged box, returned my heirlooms under documented supervision. I inspected the hinge of my grandmother's jewelry case personally. The dust pattern was undisturbed, balance restored. People have asked me, quietly, cautiously, if I regret how it unfolded, if I wish I had confronted them privately, given them a chance. The answer is simple. They had chances. Every time they turned that duplicated key. Every time they forged my name. Every time they stacked illegal cash beside family history. They chose strategy over blood, so I chose precision over sentiment. The city moved on. New commissioner appointed. Reform committees established. Public trust, cautiously rebuilt. And me, I still sit at the same mahogany desk. My federal record remains immaculate. My name remains mine. But here's the question no one asks out loud. If the people who raised you used your identity as a shield for their crimes, would you protect them? Or would you document everything, wait patiently, and dismantle them with their own overconfidence? Because corruption doesn't always wear a stranger's face. Sometimes it calls you daughter. And if you think this story was about betrayal, people assume the story ended the day my parents were sentenced. It didn't. Sentencing is theatrical closure. Cameras flash. Headlines spike. Commentators dissect morality for a week, and then pivot to the next scandal. But power doesn't disappear overnight. It dissolves slowly. From a federal correctional facility, my father still tried to maneuver. Through intermediaries. Through old political allies who owed him favors. Quiet calls placed to former colleagues suggesting the investigation had been overzealous. Corrupt networks rarely die cleanly. They fragment. And fragments are dangerous, which is why I didn't celebrate. I monitored. As Chief Risk Officer, my role expanded beyond corporate compliance. I oversaw vulnerability modeling, exposure mapping, systemic threat forecasting. I applied the same frameworks internally that I once used to dismantle supply chain fraud. Because what my parents built wasn't just a bribery pipeline. It was a culture. Developers who had normalized expedited fees. Officials who had grown comfortable with handshake agreements. Advisors who knew, but never asked questions. When the FBI arrested Richard Sterling, they removed the visible head of the structure. But the structure itself required stress testing. I met with Agent Hayes twice more, not as a suspect, not as a victim, but as a consultant. Quiet conversations about municipal risk blind spots. About how corruption hides inside procedural gray zones. He once asked me something I hadn't considered before. Did you ever hesitate? He said. Yes. I answered honestly, not because I doubted the legality. Because I understood the cost. Publicly dismantling your own parents isn't just strategic, it's permanent. You don't get quiet holidays after that. You don't get reconciliation dinners. You get silence. Extended family split into factions. Some called me brave. Others called me ruthless. A few stopped calling at all. But here's what most people misunderstand. I didn't choose between family and justice. They did. The moment they forged my name, they made me an accessory without consent. The moment they placed that first stack of cash beside my grandmother's ring, they converted sentiment into liability. I simply reversed the transaction. Control is never about emotion. It's about timing. If I had confronted them privately, they would have erased evidence. If I had warned them, they would have repositioned assets. If I had panicked when the FBI walked in, I would have validated their narrative. Instead, I waited. I let federal procedure create the chain of custody. I allowed law enforcement to drill the vault. I handed them the decryption key only after the money was seized. Not revenge. Containment. 6 months after sentencing, I visited the lakeside cabin my grandfather built. The deed, once nearly tainted by association, now sat secured in a reinforced document case under my sole control. I stood on the dock at dusk, watching the water settle into glass. For the first time in years, there were no hidden variables left in my personal life. No duplicated keys, no forged signatures, no unseen hands moving assets in darkness. Clean lines, clean ledger. People still ask the hypothetical, if you could go back, would you handle it differently? No. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Corruption survives on the assumption that loyalty will override logic. They believed I would protect them because they were my parents. They never calculated that I would protect the system instead. And that was their fatal miscalculation. So let me ask you something. If someone weaponized your identity, your reputation, your integrity, as a shield for their crimes, would you confront them quietly and hope for remorse? Or would you document every move, wait for the precise moment, and let consequence arrive wearing federal credentials? Because this was never about anger, it was about control. And once you understand control, you never lose it again. If this story made you think differently about loyalty, power, and calculated justice, consider what you would have done in that office. Would you have hesitated? Or would you have pressed play on the evidence and watched the truth dismantle everything?